Thank you, Tom, and thanks to the Senate for organizing this wonderful event. My God, what a rich, incredible dialogue we've already had this morning today. And I stand in awe of the previous speakers who are outstanding representatives of all of us in Congress. And I want to thank Tom especially for asking me to join you here today, because Tom is very modest, but he was Chris Dodd's boss and my boss at the time we were in the school. So we greatly benefited from his great leadership, and Tom continues, of course, to be actively involved in citizen participation diplomacy around the world. I was very fortunate during a long career at USAID that I served in a lot of very interesting countries. And the last country that I served in overseas, I was director of USAID in South Africa during the Nelson Mandela administration. I don't have to tell you how extraordinary that was. President Mandela, extraordinary individual who really lives up to everything you could possibly imagine about a leader. And one of the things that he said, one of the many great things that he said, when he reflected on the aftermath of the fall of the Soviet Empire, he said that now the reality is that we no longer can be ignored. We no longer can ignore that we live in an independent world, or interdependent world, which is bound together by a common destiny. It reminded me also when he made that statement at a speech that I attended about the creation and the importance of the African National Congress as a party, of course. What gave the African National Congress its power? Citizen involvement, grassroots organizations, trade union leaders, religious leaders, bus drivers, teachers, ordinary citizens, housewives organizing themselves to fight the evil of apartheid. But the other thing that was very important about this is that they also had help from you and me. There was a tremendous outpouring of support in the international community, from the United States, from Europe, from Asia, all over Africa and Latin America, political leaders, religious leaders, all of us in our society. We wanted to help the South Africans feel that they were not alone, that they could make a difference, they could change. And of course, we now know the marvelous thing that's taking place in South Africa, that great democratic transformation that has occurred there. So one of the things that I thought was important to start off with today was talk about that experience, some other things that my organization, RTI, International Research Triangle Institute, is involved with in terms of furthering democracy and governance around the world. In the case of democratic governance, RTI, like many other firms that are engaged in this field in international development, are involved in implementing numerous projects by the U.S. Agency for International Development. USAID has always been in the forefront in leading the United States efforts to support democratic governance throughout the world. And a key pillar in everything that we do in most of our democratic programs in some 40 countries around the world is actually citizen involvement. We try to make sure that we build room in all of our programs to support democracy and governance around the world for citizen involvement. Nothing is more important. First of all, because we have a lot to offer in terms of our citizen people like yourself, who are actively engaged in citizen diplomacy. And secondly, we're trying to create role models in the countries that have not had the benefit of democracy in the United States to be able to do that. So what about the scope of our government projects? Well, we're working with partners in public institutions and civil society. We pursue innovative approaches and build on best practices to create a foundation for democratic governance. Our goal is to help build more effective, accountable, responsive, transparent institutions, not just at the national level, because so often I'm afraid that sometimes when we Americans go overseas and engage in a country, we think about the capital. Well, the reality is, I think a famous politician in our country once said, Tip O'Neill, I think, all politics is really local. And so you have to work at the local level. You have to engage people at the local level. And that's where your future leaders are going to come in terms of national leadership. So for the past decade, RTI has implemented projects in more than 40 countries working to improve people's lives by strengthening democratic governance and developing the national and local capacity to really provide better services. Some of the areas we've been involved with include decentralization, democratic local governance, civil society development, legislative strengthening, etc. I want to just use 3 examples today to talk about some of the things we've done, which also provide an illustration of how we involve citizen diplomacy. First of all, what are the common elements of all of these projects I'm going to talk to you about? The common elements are, first of all, exchanges between the United States and the host country. Secondly, we found more and more, and this won't be any surprise to those of you who've been involved in these activities for many years, that there now is a new South-to-South dialogue. You find countries like Brazil and South Africa have exchanges throughout civil society. And then, of course, you've got Europe, very rich civil society. Europe is very active in most of those countries where we work. These exchanges provide tremendous value in terms of knowledge sharing and the development of partnerships and mutual understanding. Let me start with one country, which is not some country that's in the news, and that's because things are going more or less well there, and that's Bulgaria. Eastern Europe, Bulgaria, one of the many countries that, of course, threw off the decades of autocratic communist rule. Bulgaria this year, you might, I'm sure that you folks, because you're very active in international affairs, you're well aware that Bulgaria this year was admitted into the European Union. A big step forward. I know the ambassador probably follows this very closely. We had USAID created a program there right after Bulgaria came out of communist rule to look at local government, something called a local government initiative. RTI was asked by USAID to work with the 200 plus municipalities in Bulgaria to help strengthen local government. We've engaged in a wide range of activities, strengthening training, local legislators, providing technical assistance to the municipal staff to provide services, etc. But we also had a very important event. In 2006, we brought 20 members of the Bulgarian parliament to Washington. These are the individuals who have formed a government caucus in parliament across all party lines to try to work together for the common good of Bulgaria. So what do we do here? The kinds of things we expect. We met with members of Congress. We met with the people who run the caucuses within the Congress. And also we met with individuals in civil society who were interested in Bulgaria and also demonstrating what they are doing with their own organizations here in the United States. Another example, the Ukraine. Of course, a few days ago, we see the Orange Revolution is continuing. The Ukrainians are probably fatigued, overly fatigued from going to the polls 3 times in a short period of time. But at the same time, I think besides the controversy that we see in the Ukraine, I think it's also an indication of, in reality, there's a vibrant political life under democratic governance in the Ukraine. We again have been working with a local government program to help create an association of Ukrainian cities, and it supports 25 regional offices. We've tried to improve the capability of local governments to advocate their interests at the national level, because one of the things that we find in our work around the world, because there's often so much of a focus on the capital city, there's a need to create space within the national government for a dialogue in local government. Very, very important. Finally, the last example I'll use is, surprisingly so, Iraq. We've been implementing the local government support program in Iraq for the last 5 years. We work in the 18 provinces of Iraq, and we've been training local government officials, these newly elected officials who were elected in 2005. And also working with the municipal services staff to provide services in the cities. One of the things that was really noteworthy from our experience is that in 2005, we brought the Baghdad City Council to the United States. They traveled to Washington, to Denver, to Houston, and what do? The kinds of things that we always do in these kinds of exchanges. They talk to people in the city council. They talk to elected representatives in the Congress. They met with community groups working on things like HIV/AIDS, food programs. They looked at the wide range of things that were going on in our society that could help these newly elected officials who really want to make a difference in Baghdad. Now, none of us know where Iraq is going to end up, but if there is some stability, if there is some space for Iraq, people like this are going to form a leadership pathway that can make a difference in the country in the future. Finally, let me close out by talking about a couple of obstacles that I see in citizen engagement. It's already actually been touched on. Congressman Moran, I think, is very eloquent on this, and that is travel restrictions, both perceived or real, and reciprocity by the countries that impede Americans from going to the countries. We've got to continue to speak out collectively to do something about this. Secondly, we see strict oversight and regulatory requirements on civil society organizations in countries. Russia is the most glaring example of this in terms of the tightening of civil society to operate, to organize, etc. And that means, of course, for our ability to engage in civil society. And then finally, and this is touched on by a colleague in the State Department, the reduction in funding. We need to be advocates for increased funding for the State Department, for USAID, for other federal agencies that are engaged in trying to open doors of bringing more people here, and also encouraging Americans to engage overseas. So I think there's no better group than the Center and its affiliate organizations to try to deal with some solutions to this problem that we face. And I really welcome the opportunity to be here today to talk about some of the things we've been doing, and I applaud the work that you're doing. It's really been Great opportunity. Thank you very much.